Hey, what's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're taking a look at a fake Benchmade 940. And before we get into that, I did want to take a second to shout out another channel here on YouTube, Randy's WSG. He actually sent this over for me to check out, so without him, this video wouldn't be possible. But also, I'll link to him in the description. He's putting out great content. Go show him some love. He's also just a pillar of the knife community. So in addition to sending this knife over to check out, he also sent over a grip of stickers, his channel, which you see at the top of the screen right now, a couple other YouTube channels, some knife brands, even a local outdoor retailer. So appreciate that for sure. Always love getting slaps. And then he sent back the Jack Wolf Knives Pioneer Jack that I had sent him to check out. And I had sent it in its original slip, which he of course sent back. But he also sent back a slip that he made for it. And so I think that's really cool. One, because it's just cool to have something made by a friend, always appreciate that, but two, because he's pretty new into leatherworking and he's definitely getting better at it really quickly, and so it's cool to have an early version of this. I don't know if he's sent any out to other YouTube channels or anything like that. I know he's made some for himself, but even if he has, it's still a pretty early version, and it's going to be cool to look in a year what he's making. I'm sure it's going to look a lot different than this, but the one we have here is also really cool. So you can see it's custom made for this Pioneer Jack, exact size in terms of height on the back there. Has this easy access cutout, which does really make it easy to just pinch and grab rather than having to pinch the slip itself and dump it out. You can just get easy access into there. And so that's really nice. You can see it has this bull skeleton or skull stamp on the front, and then another on the back that took me a couple days to notice. And I think one of the reasons is I'm holding the slip like this in some cases. The other reason though is it's really small. So we have this skull and crossbone stamp in the bottom right hand corner, which I think is pretty cool because it's like an Easter egg. I didn't know it was there. He didn't tell me about it. It took me a while to find. So like that quite a bit. And then he had this lanyard pull with his homemade bead, and I've been kind of appreciating his beads from afar for a while, so excited to get that on here actually. He makes these out of a resin, and this one has a black and glow-in-the-dark resin. And so if we hit that with a UV light, you can see that it glows really nicely. It has this green and black colorway that's kind of similar to the channel colors. So I thought that was a nice touch and excited to get that there. He's doing a lot of cool things, makes a lot of cool stuff. You've probably seen some on other channel shoutouts of like knife stands or self-defense keychain made out of sockets and stuff like that. So he's really creative and talented and just an all-around great guy. Show him some love. Let's dive into the knife. And this again is a fake 940. This is not the real thing. He paid $9 for this on wish.com. And so that's going to be your first red flag that it's a fake knife. $9 isn't going to pay the Benchmade tax to even slap their logo on a sticker, let alone a knife. Plus all the materials made in the USA, all of their marketing costs that go into it. There's no way you're ever going to get a Benchmade for $9. And so that's pretty obvious to us knife people. It's not so obvious to friends of knife people. And so that's one of these areas where I think it can be a little bit harmful, is that maybe someone knows someone that's into knives, they have a Benchmade, and a lot of times we don't tell people the price of these knives because they'll think we're crazy. You know, who pays $200 for a knife? And so they think they're getting the real thing, and they're not. And so that's one of the reasons I chose this knife actually. So I should go into that. Randy reached out, said, is there anything you want to check out? And I chose this one because it's something I would never buy. And that's me personally. I don't buy clones or copies of knives, and there's a lot of reasons that go into that. You know, obviously it hurts the company, but you're not going to see me shedding a lot of tears for Benchmade, to be honest. More importantly, it can hurt consumers. In that first example, you know, those people thought they were getting a real Benchmade and are not. And there's also people with more nefarious purposes where they're buying these specifically to dupe people into paying secondary prices for these or trade a knife that they paid real money for. And so obviously Randy's not doing that, so not a big deal there, but that is something that happens, and the more that we buy them, the more that they make them and sell them. And then there's some that are more of a gray area. You know, people buy them because they want to check out a knife that's otherwise pretty pricey before they invest any money into it, and that can hurt Benchmade or it can help them. It may make them decide, yeah, this is a good knife, I want to buy this, and so they spend their money at Benchmade. No harm, no foul, I guess. But there's also the alternative is that these are not made by Benchmade. They're not the exact same quality, and they may decide there's a deal breaker with the knife, and it's something that Benchmade couldn't really do anything about because they didn't even make the knife, and so it might not be present in the real version of it. And so the last kind of category there is people that are never going to buy from Benchmade, whether it's because they don't like Benchmade as a company, their morals, or what they stand behind, or it could be the price. You know, they can't afford it, or they can afford it, but they would just never spend $200 on a knife. And they like the design and they end up buying it. And that still, you know, hurts Benchmade a little bit because someone's taking their own intellectual property, but really they were never going to get any money out of that. So a little bit less harmful than those other scenarios. But in any event, those are the reasons that I don't buy them. I'm not someone who's going to put a flag down in the sand. I don't care if other people buy them. It's not that big of an issue to me. I just personally choose not to. And so no judgment if you do, but those are kind of the considerations that I take. Now, there is one category I didn't list, and that's what we're looking at today. You know, Randy bought this and put out a video on it, and that's something that can be helpful to those people that are getting duped by those scammers that are buying these for nefarious purposes. Maybe they're able to watch this video, look at the pictures, and identify that, you know, that's not a real Benchmade. I'm not going to spend my money there. And so I do think that there are occasions where it is helpful, this being one of them. And so with that, I'm going to compare this to my actual Benchmade 940, which is a different variation. So that makes it a little bit harder, but we can still spot a ton of differences that are red flags that tell you that this one is fake. And so the first thing that we should know is that they did make a blue 940, and there were two different versions that I know of. The first being an aluminum, like the one we have here. The aluminum is mostly the difference is the material. You also get a titanium backspacer on the aluminum, and so on this one it does not have that, but that's not necessarily a red flag because they also made it in G10 with these barrel standoffs. And so this one is more made to mimic the G10, but it copies the design of the aluminum version. So that's a little bit of a weird thing. Obviously they're both pretty similar, but on the G10 version, this little cutout here is a different shape. It's more of a rounded shape than a pointed shape. And so that's a pretty obvious thing that the G10 version did not have that shape around the screw. The other thing that you'll notice on really both of them is how slim the raised area of the handle is. So if you look at the original, the raised area really ends right after that screw and immediately drops down. If you look at it on the fake version, it's a bit wider, and so you can tell side by side. You probably wouldn't notice that, to be honest, in a picture. Now, some of the other things, I'm actually going to start with kind of one of the more obvious things and then get into just like smaller nitpicky things that maybe you wouldn't notice in a picture. But getting these closed, we can look at that logo, and with a lot of fakes, that's going to be a red flag. So if we look at the original, half of the butterfly as well as all of the Benchmade text is sticking out. On the fake, it's only the tip of the wings. There's none of the text exposed, and so the placement of that butterfly is completely wrong. And every fake is different. There's a lot of companies making fakes, and so you may have different red flags. But one thing to note with all of these 940s is you're going to get the same amount of that wing and the text really sticking out for the most part. This one's a 9400, so slightly different since it doesn't have the thumb stud, but you still have it really towards the top portion of the knife, not sitting all the way down where you can't see it behind the handles. Same thing if we flip it to the back, you have that maker's mark, so that Osborne little boomerang is much smaller on the original and also sitting a little bit higher. None of it's hidden by the handle where the tips of this one are hidden by the handle. And so those are going to be very obvious things in pictures. Now, in person, there's another way you can tell. If you run your fingers over the logo on the real 940, it's completely smooth. You don't feel any texture whatsoever. If you had your eyes closed, you wouldn't even know that you were running over a logo. On the fake, it is very textured. It feels almost like you could probably rub it off pretty easily. Obviously not going to try and do that because this is not my knife, but in theory, it's textured, it's rough, and just kind of chalky feeling, so it feels very different than the original. Now, looking at the actual logos, this fake did a pretty good job of mimicking that logo. You can see the original is slightly bolder, which is usually the case, but this is not a blurry image, which you do get with a lot of fakes. This is a pretty crisp and clear image. In fact, the trademark logo in the bottom, they seem to have blown up a little bit so that you could see it more clearly. Benchmade didn't bother with that, and so kind of a weird choice. It seems like maybe it's like 1 or 2% larger too. It's hard to tell, but just to my naked eye, it seems like maybe the logo on the fake is 1 to 2% larger. Obviously not gonna be able to tell that in pictures, but last thing in terms of that etch is the blade steel. So on the original, we have an S30V stamp right behind the thumb stud. You can see all of it. It's pretty small, but you can see all of it. On the fake, this one's stamped S90V, which is in itself isn't a red flag because they have done an S90V version, but you can see it's tucked under the handle. The S disappears behind the handle, and that's not true with any of my other Benchmade knives. And I have 10 other Benchmade knives, or 10 total at least, and so all of them, you know, the blade steel is going to be front and center, and that's because Benchmade is marketing themselves as a USA made premium company, and so they want to advertise their premium materials, and so that stamp with the steel, although it's small, is always present and always completely visible where it's not visible on here. So that's another immediate red flag if you get that. Now, this one's going to be a little bit less obvious on camera, but very obvious if you have two side by side, and that's the grind lines on these, and hopefully this will even pick up, maybe the light's washing it out. But on the original 940, it has very recognizable grind lines. They're very consistent. The width of the lines as well as the gaps between them are basically identical across the entire knife. And so it's a very consistent thing. With the fake, you have not only lighter, but some of them are darker, some of them are lighter, and it just doesn't look the same. And so it's pretty obvious in person. If you have them side by side, they don't look at all alike, but maybe hard to tell in person. Now, the other thing that's going to be impossible to tell in pictures is they're not the same blades. You can see the original is a little bit longer. The slope on here is a little bit more pronounced, a bit of a sharper tip. This one's a little bit more rounded. And so the blade is not identical by any means, but it's hard to tell that without seeing those two side by side. Looking at the hardware, you can definitely tell a difference again in person, but the tooling on the thumb stud, that Torx screw, is significantly deeper than what we have on the fake. Both the thumb stud and axis lock are sloped, but the sloping is less dramatic on the original and really kind of dramatic on the fake version. And so much bigger drop in between layers on the fake version. Flipping over to the pocket clip, this one, you know, they are different. One says Benchmade, one says Benchmade USA, but that's not really a red flag because this is an imitation of a real Benchmade pocket clip that they used to make. And so I don't have any to compare that one to, but that is something that you will see Benchmade USA. I think it looks a little bit bolder than the ones I've seen, but it's hard to compare it to a picture. And since that's an older one that I don't have in my collection, I don't really have anything to compare it to, so can't tell you for sure if that's going to be a red flag. Now, this last one is only something you're going to be able to tell in hand because it deals with the action. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I think I have 10 Benchmades. 9 of them have an axis lock, the other one's that automatic. But with Benchmade axis locks, these are meant as a lock, not a deployment method. And so if you pull this while there's nothing affecting the blade, there's no gravity obviously because I have it pointed upwards and no pressure on the blade, nothing happens. You can jiggle that all day and the blade just sits there. Obviously if it's upside down and there's gravity taking effect, it'll just swing out of there, and you can use it as a deployment method if you put some wrist behind it. But it's not meant as a deployment method, so it's not trying to get that blade out of there, kicking it out or anything. And I tested that on all 9 of my Benchmade axis locks. I probably should have tested on some other brands. I didn't because right now we're looking at Benchmade. But of the 9 that I tested, not a single one the blade moved when I did that. With this fake, if you jiggle it, you can see the blade starts jiggling, trying to jump out of there. It's kind of starting the spring process to get it out of there. And so that was never meant as a deployment method. It just happens to be a way that you can deploy it. Whereas with this one, it feels like it's kind of starting to get rid of that detent and kick it out of there. And so just something that you can tell immediately in hand. If you have that, I don't have that in any of my others. Now, as far as the action goes, the action is significantly better on my original. Kicking it out is much smoother. Closing it isn't way smoother. It basically just drops shut if you pull that in gravity, or you can swing it shut, but it's very smooth, no grittiness whatsoever. This one, you can kick it open pretty consistently. The action's pretty good there, but if you pull this, it takes a shake to get it going, and it's not always as consistent. Some of the times when I'm doing this, you'll see it get caught up in the half position. Still pretty good, but I wouldn't say that's quite a red flag. It's not as good as my 940, but I do have Benchmades that the action's not as good. So you don't always get great action with the Benchmade. And there's a breaking in period. Pretty much with every access lock, I feel like you have that breaking in period. So this one may also just not be as broken in, but it is noticeably different on these two at least. Now, I think that's really most of it. The one thing to know is this one says S90V, and yes, they made S90V, but it is not S90V. Don't expect to get any of the properties of S90V. This is a mystery metal, most likely pot steel. It'll probably take an edge, dull quickly, maybe chippy, maybe rusty, who knows. But we don't know what this metal is. Just know that it's not S90V. Now, the one thing to note here is this is scarily good for a $9 knife. Yes, you're not getting the steel that you are expecting or is advertised, but otherwise the action on this is really good. Obviously the ergos are great because it's mimicking a real design, and it's really well done and put together. And the thing about that is, it takes almost as much effort to copy something as it does to just design it yourself. And so, in fact, in some cases it might take more effort. And it would be great if they would just put the effort that they put into copying this into making their own knife company. They can sell it for more than $9, use the real steel, obviously. And there's a book out there called Steel Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And a lot of people do steal inspiration from other things, and it's not really stealing if you're able to make it your own. Maybe you change the curve a little bit or add an extra finger groove and slightly alter, the blade shape or how it sits in the pivot, and all of these different things that you can alter slightly. You can take the things that you like and change some of the things that you don't like and make a knife that you can sell for a lot more than $9, because the honest truth is they are putting out a really good product with some crappy materials, but a really good product. And so if they would just put that effort in, people would pay for it. Yes, you have to do some marketing. It's a little bit more work, but would just be all around better off if these didn't exist and they were making, something else, and they have the capabilities clearly to do it. This isn't a $9 gas station knife. This is a much higher quality than anything you're going to get like that at gas stations or random brands from Walmart and that kind of thing. And so I wish they would do that, but at the end of the day, buy what you buy, do what you do. But you won't find me, buying a lot of clones or fakes to check out on the channel. But I do think it's cool to look at these side by side and really see where they're at. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Now, there's a whole nother area, I know we're already going along, that is more of a gray area, and that's, I don't know exactly what to call it, clones, I guess, or they're not exactly clones, like Gonzo's, for example, where they're copying the exact design of a knife, but they're putting their own branding and naming the model. And yes, that's for sure a little bit better. Obviously, it's still, hurtful to the original company, their intellectual property, and people buy that knife for a lot cheaper than what they're paying for the real knife. But at least in that case, there's no question that you're getting a fake version of it. You know exactly what you're getting, and they're not trying to hide it. And so I definitely prefer that a lot more, and also something I'm not really going to buy. I may actually pick up a Gonzo at some point because I have heard good things, but want to make sure I pick up one of their original designs if I do. But either way, I'm really glad Randy sent this over, and I was able to check it out. It was definitely an interesting little experiment to look at these next to each other, so super appreciative of him for that. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification button, as it does help the channel a ton, and I hope you have a great one. Take care.